I would also like to say thank you to Andy and Arie for participating in this event. And I guess like the first question that I would have for you, what have you been up to for the last 20 years? So what are you focusing on now? And I would start with you, maybe, Andy.
So it's interesting that it happens to be 20 years because there was a lot happening in a few short years of time there. So in '99, Dave Thomas and I wrote the Pragmatic Programmer book, which really kind of launched our careers and was a bestseller on Amazon and all the rest of that. And then there was the Agile Manifesto in 2001, and about that same time we were writing the Pickaxe book, which helped launch Ruby to to where it is today. And so this was all kind of in the mix at the same time. And since this was the 20th anniversary last year of the Pragmatic Programmer, we had to revise that book to bring it up to date with what had happened. So that really gave us a lot of opportunity to reflect on just how different the world is today from 20 years ago. And even looking back at that, it's a fun conversation to have with your kids. It's like, yeah, there was no Google. We used Alta Vista. There, things that you really take for granted today. And we found a lot of little bits of text in the original edition of the Pragmatic Programmer book talking about the build machine sitting in the corner on a spare PC. And it's like, no, it's a pipeline in the cloud, right? This is completely different now. It's a different environment. It's the same ideas, but we do things very differently now. So that was an interesting exercise to kind of go back and revise that book and see, in some cases we had advice that was appropriate at the time, but just flat wrong for today. So unit testing was just starting to get traction, right? Just starting to get kind of interesting, and the wider population was becoming aware of it. So we had the suggestion saying, yes, you should go out and write a unit testing framework in your favorite language so that you have one. Great advice 20 odd years ago. For the love of God, no, do not do that today. That would be wrong.
And what was your favorite language?
My favorite language, well, as every programmer might say, my favorite language is profanity. Yeah.
I hope you mean that metaphorically, and not like literally.
This morning I realized I'd lost an hour or two debugging because I typed on lick instead of on click in Java. And of course, JavaScript's like, you're the boss, dude, whatever. I'm not going to warn you about that. So yeah, there was some swearing involved. My favorite language, it depends on the context. And that's actually going to be my answer to everything, because that's one of the fundamental concepts that we just forget about. People are like, Agile is great. Let's use it for everything. No, that's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for everything. What's your favorite programming language? Favorite for what? For systems programming, I still lean to C. I probably should use Rust, and Rust is fun. I don't know it really well enough to do that, but I lean for C for that. For day-to-day stuff, probably Ruby or Bash shell script. I'd like
to go back to that topic a little bit later, because I'm also I agree with your point that Agile is not for everything. So like one of the things that I see businesses struggling with a little bit is like the scalability of agility. And yeah, I want to touch upon that topic a little bit about how you think that maybe you started a movement that defined a new way of working across the board, across various business units, not just software development, but I learned how to code in Cobalt way back when. So Arie, what have you been doing for the last 20 years?
For the last 20 years, okay. So what we call Agile today, I started doing that in 1994. And to position it, I do Agile outside the world of IT since that moment, because I had 5, 6, 7 teams working in parallel on one delivery, and there might be 1 or 2 software development teams in there, but also completely different teams like marketing teams or education and training, and they had to stay aligned right on the same backlog. So that was my answer to that one. I did that commercially from 1994 till maybe like 10 years ago, a little bit earlier. I stopped and went then into, the coaching thing and doing the talks like we just talked about and leadership sessions, etc. But shortly after that, when you want to talk about life-changing events, Andy has his flow of publications. I was very active. Yeah, exactly. But I was very active in the DSDM community at the time, where you focused on full delivery. So not just software development, but everything, making sure that you get that value delivery that you're looking for. So I was very active in the DSDM community. It was Europe, across the globe, but most of it was in Europe. I represented DSDM when we wrote the manifesto. And when I got back, there were a couple of things happening. So first of all, you published, at least together with a couple of other guys, a manifesto. You have no idea about the impact it will have in the future. Then I came home. I think I came home on the Wednesday morning, and my wife was waiting about 75 meters away from the house, stopping the car. I opened the window and said, before you come in, you have to know the house was on fire while you were out there in Salt Lake City. I said, okay, thank you very much. And then later on, she said, oh, by the way, I'm leaving you. So if you talk about life-changing events, in one weekend, 3, right? One go. So that kept me busy, right, for the first couple of months to get it sorted again.
Okay.
But on the business side, I have always done Agile, in the natural sense of the way I perceive Agile. I've always done that. It gets more formalized, right, after the manifesto. And when you ask, those values and those principles, I think that there are still so many people struggling to get there, right? Organizations. So I think there's for a lot of organizations a long way to go. And I started doing this, and I bumped into the problem that what felt for me so natural and so logical was for a lot of people not at all. And that at one moment in time, I started diving in, and one of the things that I did, I started focusing. Okay, why is it so difficult that people have problems? Because I did, for example, at clients, you do 3 projects in a row. They have decennia of time problems delivering successful projects, and you do 3 successful projects in a row. Why is it then so difficult to adopt that way of working? And they would say, yeah, it's so complicated. And I thought, fuck, there's nothing complicated about this. That's bullshit, right? It's logic, it's structured common sense. So the question is, why are people cheating on themselves? Because that's what they do, right? If you claim it's complicated and it's not complicated at all, what's the problem behind it? And then I found out, and I those talks, I had I like to have a title, and I used to call that a couple of years ago, the complexity and the simplicity of Agile, because Agile itself is not complicated. When you're like here on the inside, that by nature, it's like, oh, there you go. But if you are in overstructured, bureaucratic, old organizations where those silos and those predefined career paths and the bureaucracy and the progress reports and all that bullshit are so internalized that people perceive it as this is the way things are in the world, a paradigm, then you realize that Agile transformation is a paradigm shift. So I started developing. So I work a lot with psychologists and people that are certified coaches because everybody wants to do it. And I think we have 32 people, including us, I think. We know that the biggest problem, especially in the older organizations, is the management team. Because they are the longest in the organization, they have the strongest old paradigms, and they will tell you it's impossible. So I started focusing on that, and I like that a lot to do that. I traveled the world.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to kind of like let go of your comfort zone. What I'm kind of curious about is like, so first of all, were all of you working in the same company? And I'm kind of curious about what was the catalyst. Was there like the camel that broke, the straw that broke the camel's back? And then did you get yourself into a room, smoke cigars, and rub your hands and say, okay, we're going to change the world? Was it kind of like a buildup of like certain learnings that you've had, and that you realized that there was a better way of doing things, or was there like one big trigger? that you said, okay, that's it. We need to change the way that we're working.
Andy, you first.
So, yeah, I mean, there were 17 of us involved there, and I don't think, maybe one or two people had been working at the same place together, but mostly everyone was kind of coming to this from their own path. I mean, you had the Scrum guys, you had the XP guys, but for the most part, you had sets of people who are off doing their thing, all kind of converging on the same fundamental idea that what we're looking at is what you would call now complex adaptive systems, non-linear systems, and people insist on using linear tools to try to manage them and to try to work them. So
I love that term.
Well, I often explain this to people. I mean, you start throwing around big sciencey words and a lot of people clam up and stop listening. But I try to explain to people, it's like, you never want to be in the position of fortune telling, right? And this goes very deep. So, I mean, you've got the obvious examples like coming up with a 6-month or 12-month detailed project plan, as Arie would say, bullshit, right? That's rubbish. It's nonsense. It's not going to happen that way. Why are you wasting your time even doing that? And people will kind of accept that argument. But then it's like, okay, now you realize you're budgeting a year out. That's just as bullshit because you're fortune telling. You go to make your code extensible and maintainable. Rubbish. You're trying to fortune tell what's going to be needed in the future. And as a species, we suck at fortune telling. We are terrible at predicting the future. We don't think that. We think we're great at it. Oh, I know what's good. No, you have no idea, right? If anybody was interviewed in fall of 2019 saying, what are you going to be doing 6 months from now? Or what are your plans a year from now? Right? How'd that turn out? Completely.
Yeah, it's also, that also like my analogy of like, pretend to do a marketing plan 1 year before Facebook is launched.
Yeah, it's like, and obviously global pandemic is an extreme example, but the smaller things happen all the time. A new framework comes out, a new version comes out. There's a TLS gets retired because there's a security bug. Your opponent gets bought by Microsoft or Skype or Apple or whatever. Stuff happens, and we carry that programmer's notion of that one little happy path and try to extend that to the whole organization and the whole market. And it's rubbish, right? You have no idea what's going to happen next. So, I try to couch it in terms of don't try to fortune tell. If you're trying to predict the future at any level, from code to business strategy to, adoption, whatever, you're already going down the wrong path.
Yeah, I guess you kind of like, you learn the future as it happens.
Absolutely.
I think what I kind of wanted to ask both of you is like, did you ever imagine that the applications of Agile could be so widespread? Because, I know both of you, and the entire team started with software development, and the thought that within 20 years it would be adapted. I mean, Fred could attest to this from A1. Their procurement department is using Agile methodology to be better. So did you imagine that the widespread applications could be actually so broad? Arie, I would actually ask you maybe.
Not the publication that we made. I think, Andy, we didn't get in and say, no, let's do something that reaches out to the whole world. No, but we wanted to make that statement, right? And as I said earlier, I started working differently in 1994. I came out of, the short story is, I was doing projects in the governmental environment, the Dutch IRS, the tax office. And what happened was that, you're with 30 people, 7 months in a project, in that very, very, very classical waterfall. And then after 7 months, you get called into an office at 10:15 in the morning, and 5 minutes later, you're out. Project stopped, killed, never started again. And I was very upset by the easy attitude that people have by announcing, oh, by the way, we just wasted a couple of million euros, no problem. And I made my change, and that was my driver to start working in a different way. I'm never ever going to do that way of spending public money again. I don't want to do that. It's wasting. So my driver was the value thing. Okay, how can I do this? And in the DSDM way of working, As I said, it's full delivery. So you bring the whole thing that you have for a new product or whatever you want to bring to the market or out there. You want to make sure that it brings the value, right? And we were working on this a lot. I think everybody has his own way of doing things, even if you're within a framework. I know that people in the DSDM community for more than a decade after writing the manifesto were rejecting anything else than DSDM. And I started adopting, before writing the manifesto, other methodologies, because I thought, if it helps me to do what I want to do, then I'm very happy. And that it's that kind of openness that I think that makes it easy to access. In terms of the widespread, in the mid-90s, when I would do those trainings and masterclasses, right, you had 15 people from a company or maybe an open market. I would say examples like, the pace of innovation goes so fast and changes are so often. 25 years later, it's a mess. I'm looking at my younger son. If I use the phrase dial a number, he has no clue what I mean, right? That thing where you dial, it's not there anymore, right? This is and that same phone, the physical phone with that dial, was in my mother's living room for what? The same physical phone, 15 years easily. I think that change forces people to start doing this. And I think it will become sort of the default. Whether it will be called Agile or not, I don't know. But the practices that we brought up to be more—
One of in like the 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto, one of my favorite, and I think, I'm not sure if it's outdated, and I'd like to hear your opinion about it, is face-to-face interactions over non-face-to-face interactions. And I'm a true believer of like human exchange, people simply talking to one another. So there's like two things that really stood out for me in the manifesto. One is that any kind of, because you talked about development specifically, but for me, it's like any kind of like idea creation needs to be linked to business purpose. And the second one for me that I really embrace is face-to-face interactions over.
No, it's not over.
Yeah.
It's the face-to-face interactions are the best way to convey information. That's what it says. And
do you think that's, well, first of all, the context of like COVID and distancing and things like that make that difficult. But
no, not at all.
If it wasn't for COVID,
right
yeah.
now.
Yeah, I recommend that.
Okay.
This is face-to-face, because the important part isn't necessarily that I can see you or see your body language. The important part is that it's a dialogue, that I can ask questions, I can clarify, I can say, well, that doesn't make sense to me, and kind of track it down.
You mean like rather than just documentation, for instance?
Sure, even an email, or God help us, a design document, or some static piece of rubbish like that. It's a monologue. There's more friction in trying to create a dialogue and get answers and actually understand it, because requirements analysis, right, is a nonsense term. It's never been that. That's never the right way to do it. What you want to achieve is shared understanding. And that's the hard part. And that's why communicating in a forum where you can actually have a dialogue is preferred, because you can get to that shared understanding quicker. Somebody asked me once, what is it that programmers really do, right? Management might think that it's just typing. If you could type faster, we could get software out faster, right? Well, that's not it, right? What do we actually do? It's about communication and learning. Those are the two fundamental activities of software development, and other knowledge work areas as well, right? The folks back in the day, the management gurus, were all over the fact that knowledge work is very different from other kinds of activities. Management hasn't figured that out yet, and it's universities and master's programs still don't quite grok that like they should. But it's all about communications and learning. And you say learning, okay, well, yes, there's the tech. You got to learn the new tech, right? Today is Thursday. There's 4 new JavaScript frameworks just came out. Not even kidding, right? So you've got to learn the tech, but you've got to learn the characteristics of the system under development. The emerging characteristics as the system is growing, you're learning it. You're learning how your team reacts and how you interact with them. You're learning the needs of the user, the domain, whatnot, right? So it's a constant state of learning, and you're communicating all of this. You have to communicate with your team members. You communicate through the machine with the code. You're communicating, hopefully, with the end users, so you're not just developing something in the background. And yet, how many of our practices or our underlying theory are centered on learning and communications? A few. You've got XP's pair programming. I mean, you've got little bits and pieces here that kind of, speak to that, and bits in the manifesto saying, the number one item, right? What's the number one item on the manifesto? Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And no one ever gets to the other three because they get tripped up on that one.
What surprises me is that in those COVID times, you talk about face-to-face communication and how do you do this now? Because, we're all working from home. And the fact that people have to realize this is face-to-face too. The only thing with you not being in a room is I don't smell you. And that's not necessarily a disadvantage. I mean, right? We have I think the biggest problem in whatever you make, even if you make a suit or a boat for someone, is the moment that you go into the remote and written communication, you mess up the communication process because interpretations and assumptions and prejudice, they make everything wrong. So this is why we are there. And I, on top of what you just said, Andy, I like to see people, because when I'm at end users and we show what we have made, or we let them try to work with a prototype, I like to see the expression on the face, because it tells me, is this really good or is it moi? And that helps me, because instead of finding that out after 7 months of work during a user acceptance test at the end of the process, I know it right now. And that's why I want to do face. And these kind of tools work really good.
That's what he's talking about. That's like the most important thing, right? That's the whole point of Agile, is to get fast feedback. It's not that hard.
Exactly. And also you talked about systems, and we can talk about systems like in terms of, let's say, software development, but things are systems in general. Organizations are systems, any kind of like processes that business goes through is systems. Like I said, like whether it's marketing, whether it's HR, whether it's whatever. And that's why I think like one thing that we're trying to do with Empowering Agile is just make people kind of like understand that like the Agile way of thinking is applicable to a lot of areas of business. Now I'm going to ask you a very provocative question. So your colleague, Dave Thomas, gave a pretty cool talk that was called Agile is Dead. I'm not sure if you saw it. I think it was at a conference in Denmark. And
I might even have been there. I lose track, to be honest. But
yeah, what he was talking about, forgive my French.
Yes.
But what he was talking about is the bastardization of Agile ways of thinking, and that it's been kind of consumed by consultants that's now start to, spell it with a capital A. And it's like a new consultancy that you're kind of like selling. Do you have any thoughts on that?
How long you got? No, I have quite a few thoughts on that. So back to the question you asked before about when we were writing the manifesto and what effect we thought it would have. One of the things that was going around the room was the idea that, okay, having launched these principles out there, these abstract principles, that what would happen next is exactly that. Every consultant and his dog would come out with their own Agile set of practices, their own things, drawing from other sources, bringing stuff together, and everyone would have their own unique flavor. And that didn't happen, really. What happened was Scrum took over the world. Everyone now equates Scrum with Agile, which is about.
How do you feel about that? Because there's there's like principles and then there's processes. And
I've had people come to me with a very straight face. Multiple organizations come to me with a straight face and said, "Yes, we're Agile. We do half of Scrum badly, and we use Jira for tickets."
That's a very common happening. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, bastardized, absolutely, right? I have met a countless number of Agile coaches who've never read the manifesto.
Yeah.
they've never read any of the underlying theory. They don't know who DHOC is or chaos theory. They don't know anything about complex adaptive systems, any of Jim Highsmith's work, right? They don't know any of the sort of foundational theories that led into this. They're not even aware of things like XP technical practices that you have to have, right? Scrum is a lightweight project management framework. It's also for beginners. It's a set of concrete practices for beginners. Now, I say that because this is kind of what we got wrong, I think. When we came up with the manifesto, we all sat around and, Arie will remember, everyone had their own agenda, their own focus. And so a lot of it was kind of hammering out, well, what can we agree on between all of us? What do we agree are good ideas and good abstract principles? The problem is you go out to practitioners in the field, they can't apply abstract principles unless they're very high on the expertise food chain, right? If they're very proficient, very expert, yes, principles are great. The entire rest of the 90% of the world needs concrete practices to get started. So
can I add to this, Andy?
What's that?
Can I add to this? Because it's not only this, but also if you go into human psychology, you use the word, Joanna, comfort zone. People don't like change. So what they do is they project Scrum because that's the easy part, as Andy just said. And they look at their own role and they look at their own. And so you meet people that say, yeah, we do Agile. We have a sprint for analysis, for functional design. This is not a joke. I wish it was a joke. It's not. So if people say, because that was your question, Agile is dead, Agile has to mature first. And I think
that's a good point.
Call it Agile or not, this way of thinking and working will become the default because the pace of change has gone up, will never go down, and you have to be able to respond.
Yeah, I think the pace of change is literally just extremely accelerated.
Of course.
I mean, I've been hired for, like, let's say, setting up Agile teams, and a client asking me, what will this project look like in 7 years? Like,
we'll be on Mars, in Elon Musk's Teslas. Who the hell knows?
who the hell knows?
It's no, I lost the thread.
Dave Thomas, Agile's dead. That was it.
It's dead. What was the last thing Arie said?
I said it will become the default. That's what I said, because of the pace of change.
Right. So, the very first line of the Agile Manifesto, which nobody remembers or quotes. How does it start, right? We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it, right? We didn't just pull this out of some warm, dark place, right? This was born out of practice. But it's not that we discovered the 10 Commandments etched in stone. We are uncovering. It's a process of discovery, a process of experimentation, right? It still is, or it should be. And this is where, as an industry, we went wrong. Everyone stumbled upon Scrum and said, hey, this is better than a 6 or 12-month waterfall. It's a 2-week waterfall. Much better. We can maybe do that. So when we do little baby waterfalls, still missing the point that what you really want is to be able to deploy continuously. You want continuous deployment. You don't want to ever have things like long-running feature branches, right? People use Git wrong, right? I mean, which is kind of astonishing, but they'll leave some feature branch going for 4 months, 6 months, and then merge it back into master. Congratulations, you just reinvented waterfall.
Yeah, I think like any kind of like, oh my God, I want to say like creative development or ideation or whatever, it literally is a daily event, right? So it doesn't end. So there's always, I think like the most obvious thing that I always point to is all the apps that we have on our phones. So how often do we get like notifications about upgrades? Somebody's always developing a new feature, a new functionality, but also in other parts of our lives.
Cycle, right? They're not waiting for a quarterly release cycle. It's like, hey, here's a cool idea. Boom. They've got it ready. It might take Apple a while to put it up, but they're deploying as rapidly as they need to for their market. And that's what it's really all about.
Those release cycles, I think 9 out of 10, Andy, I don't know what your experience is, but they are put on your table as a given fact. that cannot be changed in the organization. And the people who are so rigid about this are, and I can say this freely because I'm 56, close to 57, but those are most of the time guys in their 50s with gray hair and a beard, and they are the worst. Yeah, sorry. It's not about being personal, but you know, but this is what you mean.
I mean, you got the same thing going on there. So
Yeah, but even like, you know, the same kind of like way of thinking is like even how detergents get upgraded, right? So we always have the new and improved. You know, there's always like some sort of like improvement and iteration going on.
the old one was fine. You didn't need to change the packaging and make it smell like roses, or you know, just
yeah, it was good enough. It was good enough. So how proud of yourselves are you? Have you done a cool thing? And have you actually realized that you created kind of like a movement that is spreading through the business community globally? That, you know, like, I mean, we have things like the Empowering Agile Conference. The companies like A1, which Fred is part of, are, you know, applying, let's say, agile ways of thinking throughout a lot of different business units, even ones that you wouldn't expect, like procurement. It's being adopted as a better way of doing business. You must, do you pat yourself on the back a lot?
I don't.
I
Do you
feel
think
privileged that
have
I've
you
been part of it. That's what I feel, privileged.
Yeah.
And I am aware that we started 20 years ago, we didn't know, but we started a complete new professional domain. You know, the agilist, you know, the whole thing, and whether you want to be happy with everything that you see, with all the certifications going on and everything else. But we started a new professional domain, and that sometimes make me feel smile. What I, and this is why I think I like to do what I do. My drive then was, okay, how can we bring value to the customer instead of wasting money? That was my driver at the time. And I think I can go on for the next 20 years with that drive, because there are still a lot of people that they don't care about creating waste, because they don't spend their own money, but they spend public money or governmental money, right? And so I will be involved and because that's the honest drive that I had then and that I have today. But I'm very grateful and privileged that we're part of
that. Just to further that, right? So, yeah, I absolutely agree with Arie. I feel, you know, privileged and honored and fortunate that I happened to be free that weekend. I had the means to travel there. There were other people who were invited who just had scheduling conflicts and couldn't make it, right? So it could have been a different set of people just from random happenstance. So I feel very fortunate about that. And it's funny that, you know, my career has kind of moved in this direction of doling out advice, right? The Pragmatic Programmer book, which remains, you know, hugely popular, doling out advice for programmers. Here's how you should think about things. Here's how you should approach these problems. The Agile Manifesto. Here's how you should frame your thinking about this. Here are these abstract generative principles you should try to adhere to. My book, Pragmatic Thinking and Learning, about how to learn better and you know, do these sorts of activities. So really, my career has been a series of these. Well, we're still trying to, you know, honor that first line of the manifesto, uncovering better ways of doing things and helping to try to explain that to people. I do think if I could go back in time and change a few things, I think I would have campaigned against the word agile entirely. There were other candidates that were floating around at the time, and
curious about that. What were the other candidates? Because it's a very interesting word.
I've got actual notes from the event somewhere in the cloud, but words like adaptable. I think Jim Highsmith was big on adaptable, responsive. You know, words with these other kinds of connotations. And what you remember when Alistair Martin first booked the room, on the little monitor for the Aspen conference room, it called it the Lightweight Methods Conference. You know, that was, we had to call it something to book the room. And the notion was just trying to get something more flexible, more making you more ready to adapt to things by making it lightweight. Now, of course, there was a lot of discussion about this, and the idea of lightweight implied that a middleweight or a heavyweight would come and clean your clock and knock you, KO you. So we moved away from that. And the idea behind Agile was to try to convey this imagery of being nimble, being able to rapidly adjust to changing circumstances. And I think, going back to what you're saying about Agile being dead, yeah, that meaning of the word is gone. People don't assume that, right? People, right, they say, oh, I can prove that we're Agile because we're doing these practices, or because we use Scrum, or God help us, we use SAFe, which is neither safe nor Agile. That's another story. Regardless of that, it's like, here's the test, right? You want a litmus test. Are you Agile? All right. This huge requirements change comes in. You just realized it. Can you address it without having a nervous breakdown? Can you just sure, boom, get it done, get it out the door. You lose half your team. Can you get somebody else in and get it done and get it out the door? Major technology shift, whatever perturbs the environment, whatever happens, are you adaptable? Can you shrug it off and say, yeah, we can handle that and handle it? If you can do that, you're Agile. And I don't give a fig if you're using Scrum or if you're using chicken bones or, Ouija board, whatever, right? That doesn't matter. Are you actually a fast adapter? Can you adapt to change? Because I started to say before, when you're talking about the pace of change, whatever we're experiencing now as the pace of change is the slowest pace of change we will experience in our lifetimes. It is monotonically increasing. It don't go back. Once that genie's out of the bottle, it just keeps going. So ponder that, because we've been through obviously quite some significant changes in the last 12, 18 months. And consider that's just going to get faster. So I don't think we have the luxury of saying, well, we're going to stick to our linear command and control, rubbish, whatever the business school taught me methods. Yeah, you're going to get your lunch eaten. Right.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's just kind of like continuous running up against a brick wall. So it's the classic thing of you keep doing the same things and you're expecting something different and it just doesn't happen. So I'm not sure if it's an Einstein quote, but yes, adaptability, I think, is really interesting from, let's say, the software development point of view, because it's such a fast-paced kind of thing, but also just overall in a business point of view, but I think also in a personal point of view, right? So
what was the subtitle of Kent Beck's book, XP Explained? The very first XP book, what was the subtitle?
Don't remember, I'm not a developer.
Well, but everyone should know this, right? The subtitle is Embrace Change. Not grit your teeth and put up with change. Not hire a ton of management consultants and try to go through SAFe with a label maker, but embrace change for competitive advantage.
Yeah, I thought so too. It's a couple of times I try to talk to clients about that, but it seemed to be like a little bit of an over sophisticated thought, which is change is nothing to be feared. It's kind of like an opportunity to be grabbed.
Yeah.
Well, whether you like it or not, it's going to be there.
It's going to be there.
You have a lousy life, right? So you better act as if you are.
People like change. No, people hate change. I hate change. Everybody hates change.
I think people kind of get into change. They don't like being changed.
That is very true.
Well, there are a lot of people that love to walk into that same office and that same room and that same desk with the same photograph and right. And the moment that you come in and you have an idea, you get shot before you finish your first sentence. Right, that's what happens. And I think this is the world that we live in. And as I said, when I started doing this in the mid-90s, people could, quote unquote, refuse to work like this, right? And they would give you massive problems. I think today, if organizations don't have this vision that you have to go to this attitude towards work, let me put it like this, organizations will have severe survival issues in the future, in the nearby future. I'm not a fortune teller, but I think if you stick to those very old bureaucratic processes, organizations will get into deep trouble. The problem is, because Peter was asking, so what is the effective strategy to buy in CEOs into Agile? If you want to have an effective strategy, I would say physical violence, because the big problem with those guys is the only moment they accept change in their organization is when they are really in pain. Otherwise, it's like, right, this. And we have seen business models over the last 25 years changing 4 times. You know, telcos are doing different stuff, banks, insurance companies. You have to address that change in your organization with what you offer to the market. And only the ones that are really into that kind of change and working accordingly, that are, you know, staying ahead. And the other ones will just disappear. That's what's
An old friend of mine used to say, you know, people never change when they see the light. They change when they feel the heat.
Oh, I like that one.
Yes, that's true. That's very true.
Someone said in the chat over here, I can't read the name because Zoom puts it in this tiny little font, being about companies not being happy with calling it Agile, so they had to give it a new name. I've had organizations approach me to come and talk and give workshops and whatnot. I said, but don't call it Agile. You know, we love what you're doing. We know your background. We know your stuff. Don't call it Agile. Call it pragmatic development, or, you know, make up some other word for it, because we tried Agile once and everyone died. You know, it was like getting dysentery on Oregon Trail. You know, we tried Agile once and we all died.
Yeah, I think there's something about sound bites that can actually then create a negative effect, right? So
we have the election of the most annoying word every year.
Yeah.
And I think it was 2017 when Scrum and Agile were the most annoying words. It was like, okay. I mean, sometimes it's like the word consultant. And I have to be honest, and we talked about it more or less already in the last 50 minutes, but there are so many people jumping on it and have really no clue what they talk about, not open to learning. And they go into companies, the companies trust them, you know, because they think, okay, they're going to help us to, you know, become this Agile organization, and they fuck up completely. And then Agile gets the blame. And this is where I get pissed off, because it's the fucking consultant, you know, that messes up, and nobody else.
100%,
yeah,
100%.
True that. I mean, one of the reasons why we do these conferences is because I think that, I don't want to say like rigorous or orthodox or whatever, but I think we are just like really true believers in being adaptive, learning by doing, taking small steps and being iterative, and basically in experimentation. And it's, you know, like what we always kind of like talk about is like, you know, whatever you're doing, you don't want to create this great big cannonball. You want to create kind of like a heat-seeking missile that is adaptive and understands how its target is moving. So really understanding customers, understanding kind of like an experimental culture, and just, you know.
It's just that simple. I mean, that's the secret right there. It's, you know, you have to get over this human ego of trying to say that I can envision this future state and we're going to do exactly that and build that. It's like, you have no idea.
Yeah.
I can aim. It's like commander's intent in the army, right? It's like, well, we need to take this territory over there, drop you on the ground. You guys figure out how. Because as a general sitting back, I have no idea, you know, what 4 guys are going to shoot at you and what you're going to experience. It's like, well, here's the goal. Now you're in the field. You know what to do. You know, happen.
I think it's Eisenhower that said that having a plan is stupid. Having continuous planning is smart.
Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched.
Steph, do you have any questions? Steph?
Yes. I think like what I think it was like super interesting listening to you and like all your experience and all your thoughts. My question would be like, now looking back at what you did 20 years ago, is there anything else that you would put in right now, or would you still keep everything as it is?
In the manifesto, you mean?
Yes.
We get that question often, as you can. I mean, Andy, you must have had it also like 100 times or so. I was in a session with John and James Grenning and Bob Martin 2 weeks ago or so. And John said something that I also said a couple of times. It's like a declaration of independence, right? And leave it as it is and try to live up to it and make it successful in your own organization. That's what I would like to say. But maybe we have another idea, Andy.
I agree with that. Yes, and always get lessons from improv acting. That's very important. Yes, and I think that's true. And as I was hinting at before, the problem is for most organizations, you can't just give them the Declaration of Independence. You've got to give them the court decisions. You've got to give them the laws. You've got to give them the rest of the system. So what I've been doing with my buds at the Grows Institute is trying to bring in newer, fresher ideas and say, hey, here's some other stuff we've uncovered. Do you know about Cynefin domains and Dave Snowden's work? Do you know about Simon Wardley and Wardley maps? Do you know about systems theory? Do you know about human systems dynamics? Do you know about all these other bits and pieces that are very important to the psychology in organizations, to trying to get this stuff to work, and setting up something so that you can start with concrete practices. Do this. Here's how to tell if you're doing this wrong. Here's how to tell if you're on course. And then being able to graduate past that so you can get up to the level of the manifesto where, okay, we're hitting a completely unique experience. The practices don't cover this. I haven't read about this anywhere. How do we address it? Well, you go back to the basics. Go back to something in the manifesto or at the level of the manifesto of here's base level doctrine. Here is base level philosophy of, okay, well, if we concentrate on the individuals and interactions, how would that help the situation? If we concentrate on just getting a piece of software that works instead of, and go through, if we did this, how could we use that to fix this? So that's what I've been working on with these folks, is to try to get that progression of starting with concrete practices that are easy enough to follow, but making it very clear that's the beginner level. You can't stay there. You stay there, you'll only ever get beginner performance. And if you want to be a high performing team, you got to learn these other topic areas. You got to have expertise in these other areas. So had I known now this kind of stuff, I would have argued that we should have done that 20 years ago. We should.
I would like to I'm not changing, as I said, it's sort of a declaration, but listening to you, Andy, there's a sentence that I like to use often. It's you're the architect of your own life. And what I always see is that people hide behind, it's the culture, it's the company, it's my manager, or it's the structure, or it's everything we have in any company is made by men. So those same can change it, right? So if you have, and this is why I said, sometimes it has to hurt before you change. No pain, no gain. But the moment that you really need a change, you can do this. And you in an organization that's silo-based and with hierarchy layers, you need to get that permission. That's the problem. And especially when you are making a change that takes out all those permission layers, you might have people against you, but you have to start it and not say no. You have to start, and you have to start doing it instead of pointing at others or saying it's impossible and sit down in your chair.
Absolutely right. And are you guys familiar with the Westrum Continuum? If not, you should look that up, because it's an interesting way that looks at information flow in companies. And the ones that Arie has described where they're just very bureaucratic, those are described as pathological, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it just won't succeed, where people actively will hide and hoard information because that's part of their turf. And, going up to an actual generative organization where there's the free flow of ideas and criticism and dialogue and shared learning. And that's what actually works for a knowledge-based endeavor. And, and there's a continuum. There's, 4 or 5 levels of dysfunction. But the top 1 or 2, bureaucratic and it's pathological and something else. I forget offhand. But you read the description of this, and it's exactly those companies he was just describing. And it's like, and if that's your environment, if that's your context, that's going to be hard to get anything reasonable going. Which brings me.
I've read about that theory as well. Is that there's a basic like human psychology, which you hoard knowledge, right? Because it is your PowerPoint, so it's your advantage, and if you share it, then you're kind of giving the advantage to other people. So there's like, especially in large organization, there's a tendency to actually withhold information rather than sharing it because it's a competitive advantage for yourself.
In those organizations, which leads me to Martin Fowler's great quote, you either have to change your organization or change your organization.
And I think that's also a misfit for a lot of people that are not open to change, but so-called adopt agile or are agile coaches. And I saw at a client site in Romania on one of those office where you have those meeting rooms on the wall in big letters, and it said being perfect is not a state, being perfect is an ambition. And to reach your ambition, you need to change a lot. So perfect people change a lot. And then I thought, okay, let's replace perfect by agile. And there you go. Being agile is not a state. Being agile is an ambition. And to reach that ambition, you need to change a lot. So agile people change a lot. And this is a different, because what most people do is, in the past it was like this, and they take the Scrum guide, and I said, now it's like this. And they get in the same frozen situation again. Not bringing what you're looking for when you go into agile working. You're doing it for a reason, to get benefits.
Yeah. So I see Fred on my screen, which makes me think that maybe he wants to say something.
Yeah, I have a question, Arie, and it's about scaling agile in organizations. It's another trend and a big challenge for larger organizations. Have you any advice for corporates about scaling?
An advice? Well, the first one I always give is start doing it, and you bump into problems, solve them, right? Instead of saying, oh, it's impossible, it doesn't work here. There are organizations who do it, and I think, and then Andy, I go to you. The second one is, don't think you can copy that someone else did. Don't. Oh, we're going to implement the Spotify model. Even Hendrik said, Spotify is not a model. This is just how it worked for Spotify. Make your own fucking model, right? But people, and this is exactly the non-agile thing in people, they just want to copy because they go from one fixed state to another fixed state. And only that kind of change is supported. So you need to go into I had a big client, and someone from that client is now here in the group, I noticed. And I remember that the one that I signed the contract with, he asked me, he said, Arie, what will the organization look like after the transformation? I said, how should I know? I mean, he said, I was afraid you were going to say that. Yeah. And you know what happens? Then someone else comes from the big 4 or 5 consultancy firms, and they give a detailed plan up front, bring it in, and the C-level accepts that plan because that's the kind of plan they understand. And then you're screwed, basically. That's what happens.
A friend of mine once said, you don't really want to focus initially on scaling up your couple of pilot teams that are doing this good. Said, first of all, try to scale down the mess, right? Get rid of the stuff you're doing that's dysfunctional and bad first. Because what happens is you get, some small number of teams with highly experienced, skilled people. Great, let's scale that up. Well, to do that, you need a lot of experienced, skilled people who are good at communicating with each other. You got to scale up the good stuff. But again, in a bureaucratic organization with these other problems, that's all going to get in the way, and it's not going to work out well. And let me just give a quick rant. Scrum's the wrong metaphor, which I always found interesting, because it talks about a sprint, right? A sprint. What happens when you run a wind sprint, right? You're exhausted afterwards, and you have to do it again and again and over. It's a terrible metaphor. So people say, okay, it's not a sprint. Fine. It's a marathon, right? It's a long. No, marathon's still the wrong metaphor, because now you're just running for a really long time without a break. That's terrible too. And neither one's accurate, because both are linear. I know where I'm starting. I know where I'm ending. I know what's in the middle. It don't work that way. It's an obstacle course. You don't know what's next. You're going to run fast on parts of it. You're going to slow down on other parts. But the key thing is you don't really know what's coming up over that next hill. That's the metaphor. So when we talk about scaling, that's the metaphor you have to keep in mind. How can you best get teams to coordinate and communicate and learn, embracing the fact that you don't know what they're going to be facing?
And what I think is the biggest problem in this kind of situation, that people start from the scaling part, so in line with what Andy said, they start on the wrong side, let me put it like this. And also, especially C-level, they expect miracles overnight. And my father used to say, it has to get worse before it gets better. And if you want to lose weight and you start on your diet, before you start losing weight, you feel uncomfortable and hungry. And you feel you're not getting there, and then you lose a couple of kilos, and then you get to this platform where you stay for the next 3 weeks, and you do exactly the same as the diet says. You have no clue what's going on. And that's what it is. And persistence and trying to find within the values and the principles, what can we do to solve this? That kind of thinking, step by step forward, instead of implementing, we said it, implementing those big frameworks don't help, period. You have to find your own way.
That's a great example, because think about like the diet and weight loss industry, right? I mean, that's a huge, huge industry with contradictory advice, right? This method says you should eat this way. This one says, eat only carbs, don't eat carbs, eat fat, don't eat fat, do this, do that, just count calories. No, that won't work, right? Why are there so many different approaches? Because bodies react differently. For some people, this kind of diet's going to work great. For that same person, this one won't work at all. It's context dependent. And that's what none of the diet plans or any agile transformations tend to say. It's like, here's our one size fit all solution, do keto, do the, whatever. Well, no, that's going to work for some people, but it's not going to work for everybody. Context, I have gone hoarse for 20 years saying context is key. It all depends on the context.
It does depend on the context. And I think one thing that you both were saying that I think is, it's not a sprint, it's not a marathon, it's an obstacle course. It's a continuous obstacle course. And you never know when you have to jump a little bit higher or do something else, because the path in front of you is unpredictable. Yeah. I think what you were talking about a lot, Andy. And I think it was unpredictable always. I mean, if you kind of go back in history, times have always been unpredictable. Change has always been happening. We think it's happening faster now, but I think it was happening pretty fast also in the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance and during all of the historic periods. And yeah, like I said, I think it's an obstacle course where you need a sense of wit about you. You need a sense of seeing kind of what might be coming up ahead without having the perfect prediction of what's coming up ahead, but always being prepared for the unexpected. And I think that's what's happening with business now. I think that's what's happening with government. I think that's what's happening with health. That's what's happening with a lot of things. I've so much enjoyed the conversation with you guys. Steph, do you want to take some questions maybe from the audience, or?
Yeah, we actually would have 3 more questions. And the first one would be since both of you have seen a lot of organizations, when did they actually bring you in, when they already tried to do something agile? And is there any pattern when somebody tries agile, but somehow it's then broken and not working out, that happens over and over again?
I don't know about you, Andy, but getting involved and help us to learn how to do this, that changed over the last 20 years. In the beginning, it would be with a project manager, a team, and then it gradually flew into the CIO that would ask you in for help, and then in the last 5, 6, 7 years, I get asked in by, most of the time, by a couple of people from the C-level, CEO, CTO, CIO, very often as a team. I don't know about you, Andy.
It's funny. I think it kind of really has run the spectrum. Definitely in the old days, there was much more of, we tried what we thought was agile and we didn't know what the hell we were doing and everyone suffered. I had one large, well-known company come to me and we were interviewing the developers, said, how would you describe agile? They said, oh, it's a way of management beating the shit out of us to make us do more work in less time. I'm like, okay, what are y'all doing exactly? Right. So, and then I think in the last couple of years, I mean, there's still some of that out there with just, wild misconceptions, but I think it's more been, what else you got? All right, we're doing this, we're doing these things, we've gotten down to continuous development and we're in constant contact with our users. We got fast feedback. We've got all these good things going. What else you got? What else can you bring to the table? What are our next steps? How do we get into the post-agile world and, go on to the next thing? So I think that's been more of a focus in the last 2, 3, 4 years, maybe. But you still have folks who are back at this, not tripping at the starting gate, not even getting the basics down yet, which just frustrates the hell out of me. 20 years on, you'd figure we shouldn't be having those kinds of conversations. We should know better. But you look at geopolitics, apparently there's a lot of lessons that that humans have had that we still haven't learned real well. So there you have it.
The next question is from Wolfgang. Wolfgang, great to see you here in the call. And his question is, if you would need to choose a song representing agility best, what would it be?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, Fred?
If you would need to choose a song representing agility best, what would it be?
Only the good die young. No,
I would say there is this nice summer beat from 2 years ago. Pleasure in the pain, I would say.
Thank you, Steph.
That's funny.
Was one more question, right?
Great answer to that in about a week. It'll percolate in my subconscious. Oh, I know that,
Yes, so we have one more question, and the question is like, how would you actually deal with that when like an organization brings you in and they explain you like, hey, we're actually like fully agile, and they try to prove that to you by showing you some kind of numbers of how they improved, whatever the delivery, the epics that they ship or everything else, but then when you actually see that that it's just on the surface, but deep down, they still haven't reached the level of an agile mindset. How would you actually deal with that situation?
Go in, ask questions. And I do not like to put the good work of other people down. I don't like that. And also we know that, transforming into that agile organization or any kind of change is not something that you do overnight. It takes time, and every step forward is a step. And if you have questions and you get the answers, you can say, you made good progress so far, but here are a couple of things that I can recommend to you, and for this reason. And if this is your problem at the moment and you will do this, then you would get that benefit. And then it's up to them if they want to do it. Because if people don't want it, it's not going to get there.
He just hit the nail on the head. The problem is that when you're doing any kind of organizational change like that, it's not a fast feedback loop. It's a very slow feedback loop. It takes time to make sweeping changes like that. So one of the things that we do with the Grows workshops is we came up with this simulation with a deck of custom playing cards that lets you experience the sorts of problems and questions that often come up in organizations and very quickly show you, okay, your team health just dropped because you made a bad decision, or, you decided not to do this and now you've all died of dysentery, our favorite Oregon Trail joke. But so we'll take teams and put them through this simulation with the cards so that they can experience a rapid feedback loop of, okay, a developer came to me with this problem and I made this decision. Look, this worked out well, or look, this is how this screwed us completely. Okay, now let's try and fix that. And by doing several rounds of this and getting them into these kind of common problems and common dysfunctions, it helps them see, oh, God, we had something like this similar happen to us, and we did that. And yes, we did get screwed, and now we understand why. So, it's that anything you can do to try to get people to viscerally understand the underlying concepts, to move it from something in their head that they read once to actually feeling it and understanding, here's how it goes. One of the most popular things we do in the workshop, I shouldn't probably say this publicly, but it's a really cool trick. We get them to play Battleship with each other. The game with the pegs, I sunk your battle thing, right? But we change the rules on them. We say, okay, the first time you play this, you've got to take all your shots at once. Right? No feedback. And they're like, okay, fine. And then we record, okay, how many ships did you sink? Right? None. Now do it in the traditional way where you take a shot, find out if you hit one, and now you're getting feedback. Look how many more you sank. Now, it's a simple, stupid trick, but we've done this for, CIOs, CEOs, C-level folks who will do this exercise and be like, I get it. Oh my God. Like, you folks have been prattling on about incremental and iterative and sprints and scrums. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but I understand now, right? You don't want to take all your shots up front. And we'll put numbers on it, so they'll, okay, every one of those battleship shots was a cruise missile that cost you $20 million, right? So you've just invested however many pins it is, a couple $100 million, and you sank, one battleship, one carrier, whatever it was. Versus now look at this, you're spending incrementally, look what better results you get, and the light bulb goes on. And that's
a really cool trick. That kind of like goes back to what I was talking about. Don't have a plan, but have continuous planning.
Yeah.
So like Eisenhower. So
feedback, continuous feedback. That's the secret, right? Send me all your checks now. That's it.
Honestly, right? If you talk about continuous feedback and we talk about working in time boxes or with sprints, I think most teams, they do a refinement before they go into a sprint, and at the delivery, they show it to the maybe the product owner or maybe, and they have no interaction in between. There is not any feedback, and then they expect magic, right? That concept, fast feedback, pays off, and people miss that completely. And for me, that was elementary it is elementary in the manifesto there, right? That feedback, that interaction. But because people never had the interaction before, and they don't really want to change, they don't get to the real interaction that they need, and they miss the feedback. And this is where I think you gain the best benefit you have, the most value that you have is out of those interaction moments where you get the feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. What he said.
That's very good. What he said.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, getting back to your first question, this was the kind of the fun part when everybody got together to write the manifesto in the first place. There was a lot of that. Somebody would come up and posit, one of these things, and there was a lot of head nodding, like, yes, that is correct. That is the right way to think about this. It's the right way to do that. That the rest of the world still hasn't really grokked or clued in all the way. But all the folks involved there saw these things, maybe ahead of where everyone else was at the time. And again, it was just really fortunate and really lucky we were able to all get together and try to crystallize that.
So are you guys still spending a lot of your time coding or just passing on knowledge to other people these days?
I don't code anymore for a long time already.
Okay.
I coded this morning and I feel dirty. I feel like I should rest. I think I mentioned this in the previous. I actually had to write some JavaScript, and really, I just I made a typo. I made a typo that cost me an hour because I typed on lick instead of on click. Just left off. implies a completely different user experience, which I was not headed for. But yeah, I mean, I code a little bit. I don't like it at present because I think the current state of the art, especially for front end development, is a nightmare. It's embarrassing. If aliens landed and we had to explain HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and they're like, well, why is this so screwed up? Like, historical reasons. It's just, it is what it is. It's embarrassing. It's horrible. I would.
Yeah, my friend calls it kind of like spaghetti coding, where you just kind of get like everybody has a little bit of something to add, but there's no like proper information architecture. I mean, really, like when I had to study like computer programming when I was in college, it was really rigorous. It was like,
It had nothing to do with the real world.
no, but it was like, very like, very rigorous to-do loops and all of that kind of stuff. But
Well,
now it's like,
there was actually
I was, have you ever, oh, what was the name of the show? There was like a show about a startup like on HBO, and there was an entire episode about do you space or tab? And
Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, thank you, Mario, exactly. And there was actually there was a fight between a man and a woman that they couldn't have children together because he tabs and she spaces.
That's about right. Or in the old days it was VI versus Emacs. Now it's
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah,
Yeah. Tab or space. We're now going to the essence of life, don't we?
Exactly. So, any more questions from the team?
Maybe I would have one lighthearted last question because I have the website of the Agile Manifesto open. Do you guys have any intention of changing the design, or do you still think it's perfect after 20 years?
Yeah, there was a discussion about that, 2, 3, 4 years ago, maybe. Ward came around because he wanted to move the hosting to something that would be more long-lived and not require maintenance. So it ended up on GitHub Pages, I think. But there was a discussion going around about that. So, and the consensus, or maybe Ward just told us, was that, it is what it is. It was a moment in time. Here's what it was, and that's that. And I agreed with that. It's like, there's a picture. You can see the back of my head. You can go through and identify who the folks are in the picture, and there's the text, and it is what it is.
Agree. Couldn't agree more. Leave it and make it happen instead of trying to work on that one. Just make it happen.
Yeah. Before we go to the next one, you ain't gotten this one right yet. So, baby steps.
So, Andy, Arie, Fred, I'm not sure if there's any more questions. This has been an incredible conversation for me. I enjoyed so much chatting with you, and I thank you wholeheartedly for your time and your participation in this. And yeah, I think that you guys did something really cool 20 years ago. I think it's adaptable to all kinds of business problems. Like I said, I like the thought of not treating it as like a marathon or a sprint, but kind of like a continuous obstacle course. And it's not an easy kind of mindset for people. So I think you have to have a certain kind of mentality to adopt, let's say, a paradigm of continuous change. And that continuous change needs continuous, adaptability. But I'm a really big believer in it. I think our company is. I think also Fred is. So your insights and your point of views this evening have been just fantastic. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Andy, where are you based? I know, Arie, you're in the Netherlands. Andy, where are you?
My office. Raleigh, North Carolina,
Okay.
Southeast United States, for those unfamiliar with U.S. geography. Where the
So
sky is blue almost every day of the year. Carolina blue, they call it.
Carolina blue. Very cool. So again, Steph, Fred, if you want to add anything, I just really wanted to thank the gentlemen again for their time and their contribution and sharing their insights and their thoughts. It's been a really cool conversation for me.
Thank you.
Yes.
I enjoyed
Thank
it
you
myself.
all.
So thank you. I wish you a lovely
very
day,
much.
evening, night. And hopefully we see each other again. Hopefully, you
Yeah.
know, really face to face somewhere again in the future. Who knows?